Throughout this series, I've been hammering on the idea that the time for making the rhythms you love your own is now. To get us started, I've created a set of rhythm exercises linked below. Try starting with the fastest version of the exercise first and see how it goes. If you run into a wall, work your way down to the slower examples. Each of these ear training and transcription exercises is in 4, meaning there are 4 beats per measure. You will hear a metronome or a basic drum beat count off 4 beats. So listen for the pattern played by an 808 rim knock. First, you'll hear patterns of quarters, then eighths, and ultimately sixteenths. Based on what you think you're hearing, you will enter what you can into a pre-formatted Tubbs grid. You can start on them now and follow along with this episode as you work through them and switch back and forth, or save them for after watching this episode. The important thing is that you rely on what your ear is telling you and follow along to the best of your ability. Just like the melody and harmony modules, the listening process for rhythm is a simple 3 steps. Listen, define, and play it back. As always, simple is not easy, but it really is a simple 3 steps. Listening as it relates to rhythm means asking your ears good questions and counting along with what you're hearing. Defining the rhythm means organizing what you're hearing and, with the help of the time unit box system, translating it into written form. And the final step of the process is playing it back. Taking what we've transcribed and bringing that back into sound. Using your digital audio workstation software, playing it on your instrument, or what I like to think of as the ultimate rhythm practice, vocalization. Our first step of the listening process for rhythm is to listen. But listening is not a passive act, it is active. Active listening needs to be focused and directed towards the right things. When it comes to learning something new or complicated, it's really easy to pay attention to the wrong things. When it comes to processing a rhythm, it's easy to get distracted by all sorts of features of the music. How loud or soft things are, how high or low a pitch is, how many layers are happening, or what textures are present, etc. Our chief concern when it comes to processing rhythm, however, is locating an event in musical time. It's about placement. Placement ultimately boils down to figuring out on which beat, or on which measure, or on which subdivision does a given musical event fall, one level at a time. We go as far as our intuition will allow, but where our intuition fails, where we get overwhelmed by rhythm, we ask our ears the following questions. Is this musical event on the beat or off the beat? If it's on the beat, is it on the downbeat or a different beat? If it's off the beat, is it in the space of an offbeat eighth? If so, which offbeat eighth? If it isn't on any of the eighths, is it on an offbeat 16th? And if so, which offbeat 16th? And finally, if it seems to be off the beat, but isn't an eighth or a 16th, what kind of subdivision explains its location? Is there some other way to organize the beats or the subdivisions that explains what I'm hearing? Level by level, we work through a rhythm using these smart questions. Problems we used to guess at hopefully become solvable. And this is especially true when we count. Counting is a time-honored musical skill that spans musical traditions across the globe. As we listen to a given rhythm, counting along connects our own personal sense of time, which is internal, to the pattern we're hearing outside, which is external. When it comes to rhythm, counting is listening. Perhaps you've gotten to where you are now by strumming and singing basic songs, but until this point, you've largely avoided counting. But the practice of counting makes everything we're talking about real. When we count along, we anticipate the location where musical events might fall, and we notice when they don't. For example, if we count along and we know what happens is on the beat, then we can identify on which beat with certainty. If we count along and we know that the pattern we're listening to is longer than the space between one downbeat and the next, then we can be sure of how long the pattern is in measures. And if we count along and we know what happens is off the beat, we can work to narrow it down to a specific subdivision. Remember that on the main level, it's all about feeling the beat. There it is. So when we count with the beat, we simply use numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4. This part isn't the hard part. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, what am I doing now? Remember that when we go to the macro level, we start to hear how beats loop to form measures. And the downbeat emerges. So to indicate the measure, this looping pattern of beats, we simply reset our count, and each new downbeat becomes our new 1, 2, 3, 4. To keep count of the total number of measures, we can do it with our fingers. 2, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4. And we can go on and on like this. Or we can keep track of what changes. And when we listen to this, we hear one thing and a second thing. In measure 1, we hear this note. In measure 2, we hear this note. So we could call this the third measure, or we could call it the first measure, going back after the second measure to the original. Okay? And finally, on the micro level, beats are usually subdivided into 2s and 4s. You're hearing 4s right now, but this is what it would sound like in 2s. All right? So every beat is, here's the beat, and here's subdivided into 2s. And you can hear that. To track what's in between the beat, we use syllables that fall on the subdivisions between the beats. For this, eighths, the most common way to count them is to use ands in between beats. 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And then for sixteenths, we use E's directly after the beat. E, 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 E. And U's directly after the ands. Okay? And we'll hear those in context. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a E, 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 Now for triplets, while there is no accepted standard, I like using a name like Jessica. I'll show you what I mean. Jessica, 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 Jessica. Or even just plain triplet, 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 triplet. Or 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You can hear there are actually 12 total triplets in this measure. And we can try the same thing with 6 triplets, which are half the speed. We'll try there. There it is. Jessica, 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 there's one Jessica every 2 beats. Jessica, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now that you know how counting fits into the overall process for ear training, committing to it until you see fruit is crucial. As we start to ask ourselves good questions and count along with what we're hearing, the natural step that comes next is to define the pattern in the grid. We learned in episode 2 how to take a given rhythm from 3 different perspectives: the main, the macro, and the micro time levels. With the help of the time unit box system, we record our results. Once we transcribe what we're hearing into written form, we move from being unsure to having something concrete in the tub's grid format. If you have access to a sequencer or a digital audio workstation MIDI roll, these interfaces work similarly to our tub's format, with some exceptions. Hardware sequencers typically operate on the assumption that you want a grid of 16 subdivisions by default. This may or may not suit your given rhythm. And software MIDI interfaces have adaptive grids with nearly infinite resolution, depending on the scale or perspective that you want to take. This is why it's important for us to take what we understand about a rhythm to the interfaces, not the other way around, where we play random things and hope for the best. Before transcribing, try locking down how many measures you want to attempt, and be aware of how many beats per measure there are, and know what resolution and type of subdivision you want to transcribe. If you're truly learning to play rhythms by ear for the first time in a formal way, I can't stress how important transcription is. Transcription is extremely powerful, and doing it means that we value going from an unprocessed, messy understanding of a rhythmic pattern and turning that into something that's refined. What we're left with is an idea, a visual representation of the rhythm that we like so much that we decided to go through the trouble of processing it into beats, measures, subdivisions, and ultimately recording our results on the grid. From here and only here, when our rhythm is fully defined in written form, can we move on to our final step, playing it back. Playing it back means taking what we've written and performing that out loud, either through your DAW, on your instrument, or what I highly recommend, the practice of vocalization. If you do use some kind of sequencer or digital audio workstation software, this is very easy to do because the ability to play it back is built into the transcription. In this case, what you do is hit play and listen for incorrect placement, comparing what you've transcribed to what you heard originally. Counting and vocalization are 2 different things. Similar to the practice of counting, vocalization is another time-honored musical skill that spans music traditions around the world. In the Hindustani music tradition, for example, vocalizing patterns is an integral part of learning the tabla as a complement to gaining technical proficiency.
The bowl is like this. Take a dha, ge, na, ti, na, ka, dhi, na.
Dha, ge, na, ti, na, ka, dhi, na.
Very good. Again. Dha, ge,
na, ti, na, ka, dhi, na.
Dha, ge, na, ti, na, ka, dhi. We'll increase the speed now. Dha, ge, na, ti, na, ka, dhi, na.
jazz and hip-hop circles, scatting and beatboxing became ways of mimicking the behavior of horns and drum machines. Respectively. In none of these examples are musicians actually counting out loud. Instead, they're vocalizing a rhythmic pattern. To illustrate, there's a difference between me doing this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and this, 1, and, forianda, 1, and forianda. Spot the difference? In the first example, I counted the beat and clapped the pattern over it. Whereas in the second, I vocalized the pattern as I clapped the beat. Trust me when I say they aren't the same thing. Going back and forth between counting the beat and clapping the pattern one way, and vocalizing the pattern and clapping the beat the other way, makes your brain hurt in the best of ways. Different parts of your brain become responsible for keeping time. There are traditional sayings like, if you can speak, you can sing, or if you can walk, you can dance. And while it's nowhere near as catchy sounding, I'll suggest that if you can vocalize it, you can play it. Vocalization is a powerful skill, not because of how cool it sounds. It really doesn't sound cool, but because of what it does to your brain. As a result, singing and playing at the same time, one of the most common difficulties when it comes to performing rhythms, comes more naturally. Forcing ourselves to keep time vocally, as well as on our person, helps us understand internally how much time is passing in between audible musical events, which helps us sense subdivisions, even when we're not hearing them. And 3 and 4 and 3 and 4 and 3 and 4 and. When different parts of our brain are responsible for tracking along with the flow of musical time, we begin to connect rhythm from both how it sounds to how it looks on the grid. Another benefit to vocalization is the fact that it's a method of teaching ourselves new rhythmic patterns. Whether rhythmic patterns come from your favorite songs or not, you can challenge yourself with any pattern you input into the grid. In doing so, you can experience and learn new patterns you never would have come up with in the typical course of just playing around on your instrument. When each beat, measure, and subdivision has a formal name that we count along with, vocalizing a pattern using those names helps us develop a sense of familiarity with each one of them, how they feel and behave differently from the others. All of this brings us to our ultimate reason for vocalizing rhythmic patterns. New patterns that we haven't even encountered yet will start to feel like ones we've already covered. Challenging ourselves by vocalizing patterns from the page into sound means that no matter what we encounter, it won't feel alien to us. This makes the world of rhythm feel a whole lot smaller. So how do we vocalize? When each unit of time has a name, we simply speak the name when it's time to speak it out. To do this, we first keep time either with a metronome or somewhere on our person, whether it's through nodding, clapping, stomping, or moving. When we vocalize over a beat, we not only learn how the pattern sounds and feels, but especially how it locks into the grid in real time. When you reach the final step of playing it back, not only do you hear what's on the page, whatever mistakes you've made in listening or recording your results in the time unit box system get exposed. Through the experience of going through this listening process again and again will result in something that is truly priceless. It's the recognition that any pattern of quarters, eighths, and sixteenths will all relate back to the beat in a way that's expected and predictable. We start to develop our internal sense of the flow of musical time. With the help of asking our ears the right questions and counting along, and the aid of organizing everything we're hearing into time levels and units, and recording the results in an easy-to-read format, to ultimately the awesome, enriching practice of vocalizing what we're hearing. The rhythms we love and the rhythms we make can finally meet in the middle. We'll close with some important tips to remember as you complete the homework exercises and move into real-world rhythms of your own choice. Learning rhythm, especially when it comes to real-world rhythms, is always easier said than done. So when it comes to real-world songs, start with a rhythm that is both manageable and accessible. A manageable rhythm means that we're attempting a bite-sized chunk. An accessible rhythm means that it's clear and/or repetitive. In the melody module, I suggested using the pause button to help your ear freeze a moment that would otherwise escape. But when it comes to processing rhythm, pausing also helps, but not in the same way. Using the pause button becomes a rhythmic activity. Let's say we suspect something happening on beat 4. We can check this by counting along with the song and pausing on 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's a tip for processing a vocal melody rhythm. When it comes to transcribing a vocal melody rhythm, lyrics become the most concrete thing you can grab onto. If a vocal melody has a tricky shape and lots of notes, determining where a certain syllable of a word occurs can reveal an important piece of the overall puzzle. You lock onto this one, and then you realize what comes before, what comes after, and where it is in relation to the beat and measure overall. So with all that said, let's get to it.